Rick and Morty presents science as something loud, chaotic, and often dangerous. But beneath the jokes, the explosions, and the exaggeration, there is a quiet layer of real scientific ideas gently holding everything together. These ideas are not meant to be solved. They are meant to exist in the background, like distant stars, present, constant, and easy to drift past. At its core, the show treats science not as a set of answers, but as a collection of possibilities. This mirrors real scientific thinking more than it appears. In real science, certainty is rare. Models shift. Theories expand. Understanding grows slowly and unevenly. Rick and Morty exaggerates this uncertainty until it becomes absurd, but the foundation remains familiar. One of the most persistent scientific ideas in the series is the multiverse. In physics, the multiverse is not a proven reality, but a theoretical framework that emerges naturally from several well-established models. Quantum mechanics suggests that outcomes exist as probabilities until observed. Inflationary cosmology allows for regions of space to expand independently. String theory permits multiple configurations of physical laws. None of these guarantee parallel universes, but together they make the idea mathematically plausible. In the show, the multiverse is treated casually. Infinite versions of worlds exist side by side. Choices branch endlessly. Outcomes are never final. This exaggeration removes the weight from consequence, but the underlying idea remains true. Reality, at a fundamental level, may be less singular than it appears. Closely related to this is the idea of probability. In real science, probability governs everything from particle behavior to radioactive decay. Outcomes are not determined by intention, but by likelihood. Rick and Morty turns this into worlds where improbable outcomes become entire realities. A universe where something unlikely happened is no less stable than one where it didn't. This reflects a genuine scientific discomfort with the idea of a single, privileged outcome. Time is another concept the show bends freely, but not without grounding. In physics, time is not absolute. Relativity shows that time passes at different rates depending on speed and gravity. Clocks move slower near massive objects. Fast-moving observers experience time differently than stationary ones. Rick and Morty exaggerates this into timelines that diverge, stall, loop, or fracture, but the real idea underneath is simple. Time is flexible. The show also treats causality loosely, but even that has a scientific basis. At quantum scales, cause and effect become blurred. Events do not always happen in neat sequences. Some processes are only statistically predictable. Rick's technology often ignores causality entirely, but the discomfort with strict cause and effect reflects real scientific questions about how the universe truly operates beneath everyday experience. Alien biology in Rick and Morty appears absurd, but it often follows real biological principles. Life adapts to its environment. Form follows function. Creatures evolve traits that maximize survival under local conditions. High gravity leads to compact bodies. Dense atmospheres lead to slower movement. Extreme environments favor redundancy and regeneration. The show exaggerates these adaptations until they become grotesque, but the logic remains recognizable. Even the strangest creatures often obey conservation principles. Energy is required. Resources are limited. Systems balance themselves. Real biology is constrained by chemistry and physics, and Rick and Morty rarely violates those constraints entirely. Instead, it stretches them until they become visually surprising. Technology in the series is framed as limitless, but it still reflects real scientific trajectories. Automation replaces effort. Computation accelerates decision-making. Artificial intelligence optimizes processes beyond human intuition. These trends exist already, just at smaller scales. Rick's inventions represent endpoints of real research paths rather than pure fantasy. The show also quietly acknowledges entropy. Systems tend toward disorder. Machines break down. Civilizations collapse. Even advanced technology does not escape decay. This mirrors one of the most fundamental laws of physics. Entropy always increases. Rick's ability to reset, replace, or abandon systems does not remove entropy. It simply shifts it elsewhere. Memory manipulation, another recurring theme, touches on real neuroscience. Memory is not a recording. It is reconstructive. Each recall alters the memory itself. Interference can erase, distort, or overwrite experiences. While the show takes this to extremes, the fragility of memory is scientifically accurate. Identity, built on memory, becomes similarly unstable. The idea that intelligence does not guarantee happiness is also grounded in psychology and neuroscience. Increased awareness often correlates with increased anxiety. Complex cognition allows for anticipation of loss, regret, and meaninglessness. Rick embodies this not as a lesson, but as a condition, one that emerges naturally when understanding outpaces emotional regulation. Even the show's treatment of ethics reflects real scientific debates. If reality is infinite, do individual actions matter? If outcomes can be reversed elsewhere, does responsibility dissolve? These questions mirror discussions in philosophy of science and ethics, especially around consequentialism and moral responsibility in probabilistic systems. Importantly, Rick and Morty never present science as comforting. Real science rarely is. It removes certainty. It expands scale. It reveals indifference rather than intention. The universe does not care. It simply behaves according to consistent rules. The show amplifies this indifference into comedy, but the emotional reaction is familiar. What makes this suitable for sleep is that none of these ideas demand resolution. Science does not rush toward conclusions. It observes, models, revises, and continues. There is no final answer waiting at the end, only ongoing understanding. You do not need to solve the multiverse to exist within it. You do not need to master time to move through it. You do not need to control entropy to rest. The science in Rick and Morty works best when it fades into the background, when it becomes texture rather than problem. The universe expands. Laws operate quietly. Possibilities remain open. Thoughts can drift here without effort. Concepts can pass without being held. Understanding can remain incomplete without discomfort. Science, at its most honest, allows for rest. It accepts uncertainty. It tolerates not knowing. It continues, whether observed or not. And in that quiet continuation, it becomes easy to let go. Science in Rick and Morty often appears as spectacle, but its quieter presence is more constant. Behind every exaggerated invention or impossible event sits a familiar scientific habit: abstraction. Real science frequently removes detail in order to see structure. Rick does the opposite visually, adding chaos and noise. but conceptually he relies on the same process. Systems are reduced to inputs and outputs. Variables are isolated. Outcomes are tested, discarded, replaced. This approach mirrors how models function in real research. No model is complete. Each one is a simplified slice of reality, useful only within certain limits. Rick's devices rarely work everywhere or forever. They function just long enough to reveal something, then fail, mutate, or become irrelevant. That instability reflects how real theories behave when pushed beyond their scope. Another recurring idea is dimensionality. Physics describes reality not just in 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, but potentially many more. These extra dimensions are not places you travel to. They are mathematical necessities, hidden because they are compact or inaccessible. Rick and Morty transforms these abstract dimensions into navigable spaces, but the underlying idea remains the same. Reality may have more structure than is immediately visible. Energy is treated casually in the show, yet it still obeys familiar constraints. Devices require power. Systems overload. Excess energy creates instability. Even when energy appears limitless, it produces side effects: heat, radiation, structural failure. These consequences echo real physical limits. Energy can be redirected, stored, transformed, but never removed from the system entirely. Information behaves similarly. In physics and computer science, information cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Rick's technology often moves information between minds, machines, or realities, but traces remain. Memory fragments persist. Data leaks. Systems remember even when individuals try not to. This aligns with real discussions about information conservation and irreversibility. Biology in the series frequently blends with engineering, reflecting a growing real-world overlap. Synthetic biology already treats cells as programmable systems. Genetic modification alters traits predictably. Rick's biological creations exaggerate this trend, but the logic follows real research paths. Life as a system that can be modified, repurposed, and optimized within constraints. The show also reflects real limits of intelligence. Increased processing power does not eliminate uncertainty. Faster calculation does not guarantee better outcomes. Complex systems become harder to predict as they grow. This is a core insight of chaos theory and complexity science. Small changes produce large effects. Prediction breaks down. Control becomes illusionary. Rick's attempts to dominate systems often fail not because of ignorance, but because complexity resists domination. This mirrors real scientific humility. The more variables involved, the less certainty remains. Even perfect knowledge of components does not guarantee control over the whole. The idea of replacement universes reflects another real scientific habit: replication. Experiments are repeated, conditions reset, failed trials are discarded. Rick treats realities the way laboratories treat samples. This is exaggerated, but the mindset is familiar. Progress often involves moving on rather than fixing what failed. Technology in Rick and Morty rarely improves life in lasting ways. It solves local problems while creating broader instability. This reflects real technological tension. Innovation accelerates capability faster than understanding. Tools outpace ethics. Systems grow faster than oversight. These are not moral lessons in the show, just recurring outcomes. The universe itself is portrayed as indifferent, which aligns closely with modern cosmology. There is no preferred location, no special frame of reference, no built-in meaning. Events unfold according to rules, not intention. The show does not argue this point. It simply operates within it. Scientific realism appears quietly in the background. Things break. Bodies are fragile. Environments impose limits. Even advanced beings are subject to physical law. Immortality, when it appears, is unstable. Permanence remains elusive. Even exaggeration serves a scientific role. By stretching ideas beyond realism, the show exposes their structure more clearly. Infinite universes highlight probability. Extreme intelligence highlights emotional cost. Total control highlights systemic resistance. None of this arrives as explanation within the narrative. These ideas exist as texture. They sit beneath the surface, supporting events without demanding attention. You can notice them or let them pass. They function either way. The science does not pause to be understood. It continues operating quietly in the background, shaping outcomes without announcing itself, repeating patterns, adjusting variables, drifting forward alongside everything else that keeps moving without instruction or conclusion. Scale is another scientific idea that quietly shapes everything in Rick and Morty. The show constantly shifts perspective, moving from the microscopic to the cosmic without transition. This reflects a real scientific discomfort with scale as a fixed reference. What feels large at one level becomes insignificant at another. Atoms resemble solar systems. Cells behave like cities. Galaxies cluster like particles. The laws do not change, but their effects do. In physics, scale determines which forces matter. Gravity dominates at large distances. Quantum effects dominate at small ones. In between, familiar mechanics operate. Rick's inventions ignore these boundaries visually, but conceptually they still depend on scale. Problems emerge when systems built for one scale are applied to another. Instability follows. Unintended effects appear. Real scientific systems rely on backup mechanisms. Biological organisms, duplicate genes. Machines include fail-safes. Networks reroute around damage. Rick's universe exaggerates this into literal duplicates of people, places, and timelines. When one version fails, another continues. The logic is extreme, but the principle is familiar. Survival favors repetition over uniqueness. Randomness also plays a quiet role. In real science, randomness is not chaos. It is structured unpredictability. Noise in systems. Fluctuations around averages. Rick's universe often treats randomness as a source of humor, but it reflects real uncertainty. Outcomes vary even under identical conditions. Control is always partial. The show frequently blurs the boundary between simulation and reality. In science, simulations are essential tools. Climate models, particle interactions, neural networks. These models are not reality, but they behave according to the same rules. Rick's simulated worlds behave convincingly, because real simulations do the same. The distinction matters less to systems operating inside them. Observation itself is treated strangely. In physics, observation affects systems at small scales. Measurement changes outcomes. Rick's interference often alters events simply by occurring. This mirrors the observer effect, exaggerated but recognizable. Systems behave differently when monitored. The brain is treated as both machine and mystery. Neuroscience increasingly models cognition as computation. Signals, feedback loops, chemical modulation. Rick's devices manipulate minds directly, but the underlying assumption aligns with real research. Thought arises from physical processes. Changing the system changes the outcome. Limits appear even in exaggerated intelligence. Rick cannot predict everything. He miscalculates. He underestimates. This aligns with Gödel's incompleteness, computational limits, and undecidability. Some questions cannot be answered from within the system. No intelligence escapes those constraints. The universe in the show operates without central coordination. No guiding intelligence. No universal plan. Systems emerge from local interactions. This mirrors complexity science. Order arises without design. Patterns form without intention. Rick exploits these patterns but never controls them fully. Cause and effect stretch thin but never disappear. Even when timelines branch, consequences remain localized. Actions ripple outward unevenly. Some effects fade quickly. Others persist unexpectedly. This reflects real sensitivity in dynamic systems. Biological diversity appears exaggerated, yet it follows evolutionary logic. Variation emerges. Selection operates. Environments shape outcomes. Even absurd creatures exhibit internal consistency. They fit where they exist. Physics in Rick and Morty rarely breaks rules outright. It bends them, stacks them, overloads them. The humor comes from scale and speed, not pure violation. The universe still reacts. Systems still collapse. Energy still disperses. The scientific worldview underneath remains quiet and persistent. No miracle fixes remain stable. No solution lasts indefinitely. Everything degrades, adapts, or is replaced. These ideas are not framed as lessons. They are present because they are difficult to avoid when imagining a universe honestly. Science does not promise comfort. It describes behavior. Rick and Morty exaggerates that behavior until it becomes visible without explanation. The ideas continue operating in the background, shaping events without announcing themselves, adjusting conditions, interacting, branching, overlapping, repeating, while everything else in the universe continues moving forward in the same unhurried way. The idea of limits appears again and again, even when the show pretends they do not exist. Real science is defined as much by what cannot be done as by what can. Speed limits imposed by light. Energy limits imposed by conservation. Knowledge limits imposed by uncertainty. Rick's technology often seems to bypass these boundaries, but the consequences quietly restore them. Systems overload. Bodies fail. Outcomes slip beyond prediction. One recurring scientific tension is between control and emergence. In laboratories, scientists isolate variables to understand systems. In the real universe, variables rarely stay isolated. Rick attempts to impose laboratory-style control on reality itself, turning entire universes into experiments. The instability that follows mirrors a real problem in science. Complex systems resist simplification once they pass a certain threshold. When something fails, it is replaced rather than repaired. In engineering, replacement is often cheaper and more reliable than fixing complex failures. Rick's casual abandonment of worlds and tools follows this logic. It is efficient, not sentimental. The science underneath values function over continuity. Even identity becomes a variable. In neuroscience and psychology, identity is not a fixed object. It emerges from memory, habit, and biological continuity. Rick and Morty stretches this idea into visible duplication, but the science beneath it is familiar. When memories change, identity shifts. When continuity breaks, the self becomes ambiguous. The show frequently places intelligence in environments it cannot fully dominate. High intelligence increases awareness of complexity, but does not eliminate it. In real research, better models often reveal more uncertainty, not less. Precision exposes instability. Rick's failures often arise not from ignorance, but from knowing too much about systems that cannot be fully controlled. Environmental dependence is another quiet constant. Every organism, every machine, every system exists within constraints. Remove those constraints and behavior changes. Rick's creations often fail when moved outside their original conditions. This mirrors real science. Context matters more than design. The concept of optimization also appears repeatedly. Systems evolve toward efficiency, but efficiency is always local. What works well in one context creates problems in another. Rick's solutions optimize for immediate goals, not long-term stability. This reflects real engineering trade-offs. Perfect solutions do not exist, only acceptable ones. Measurement appears subtly distorted throughout the series. In physics, measurement defines reality at small scales. Rick's tools measure aggressively, collapsing possibilities into outcomes. The side effects are exaggerated, but the idea is real. Observation is intervention. Scientific curiosity itself is portrayed as neutral rather than virtuous. Curiosity drives discovery, but it also destabilizes systems. Research expands knowledge while removing illusions. Rick embodies curiosity without restraint, showing its power and its cost without commentary. The universe remains indifferent throughout. This indifference is not cruelty, it is neutrality. Physical laws do not react to desire. They operate consistently. Rick exploits them, but cannot negotiate with them. This mirrors the real scientific view of nature. Even humor in the show functions scientifically. Exaggeration reveals structure. Absurdity exposes assumptions. By pushing ideas past realism, the show makes their underlying logic easier to notice. The science continues operating quietly beneath everything. Models fail. Systems adapt. Variables shift. No final state arrives. The universe does not settle into completion. These processes do not resolve. They persist. They overlap. They repeat. They remain present, whether acknowledged or ignored, moving forward alongside everything else, steady and uninterrupted, without asking for attention or understanding. Another scientific idea that quietly persists throughout Rick and Morty is irreversibility. In real physics, many processes cannot be undone. Heat disperses. Structures erode. Information degrades. Even when equations allow reversal in theory, reality rarely cooperates. Rick's technology often creates the illusion of reversibility, resetting timelines, undoing damage, restoring bodies, but traces remain. Something always carries forward, a residue, a shift in context, a loss of alignment. This reflects a real scientific understanding. Systems remember their past through their present state. Even when variables are reset, the path taken matters. In thermodynamics, this is why entropy cannot simply be reversed. Rick may replace outcomes, but the universe continues accumulating history elsewhere. In science, effects tend to be local before they are global. A reaction begins at a point. A failure spreads outward. Rick's interventions often start small and expand unpredictably. The inability to contain effects mirrors real challenges in nuclear physics, ecology, and network science. Containment is temporary. Spread is natural. The show also reflects real scientific skepticism toward permanence. No structure is treated as eternal. Machines decay, bodies fail, civilizations collapse. Even when immortality appears, it is unstable or conditional. Real science holds a similar view. Everything exists on borrowed time, sustained by energy and maintenance. Communication across systems appears frequently and quietly breaks down. Signals distort. Translation fails. Meaning drifts. In real information theory, noise is unavoidable. Perfect transmission does not exist. Rick's near-instant communication still misfires, reminding that speed does not eliminate misunderstanding. Scientific progress in the show is nonlinear. Breakthroughs arrive suddenly, followed by stagnation or collapse. This reflects real research patterns, long periods of incremental work, punctuated by disruptive discoveries. Progress does not move smoothly forward. The idea of testing reality itself appears often. Hypotheses are not just imagined, but enacted. Rick turns ideas into experiments with no separation between lab and universe. Real science stops short of this scale, but the mindset is familiar. Test, observe, revise. Failure is normalized, devices explode, plans unravel, predictions fail. In science, failure is data. Rick treats failure as inconvenience rather than catastrophe. This mirrors a real research attitude. What does not work still informs what comes next. The show also treats knowledge as provisional. Even Rick revises his assumptions. New variables emerge. Context changes. Real science advances the same way. No theory is final. Everything remains open to revision. Biological limits persist beneath technological exaggeration. Bodies still feel pain. Minds still fatigue. Repair requires time. Rick's technology stretches these limits, but cannot erase them entirely. Biology remains constrained by chemistry and energy. Environmental feedback loops appear constantly. Interventions create counter-reactions. Systems resist change. This mirrors ecological and climate science. Large systems push back when disrupted. Stability is maintained through feedback, not control. Even intelligence itself follows diminishing returns. More processing power yields smaller gains. Complexity overwhelms optimization. Rick's genius does not scale infinitely. Real computation faces similar limits. Exponential growth always meets constraint. The scientific worldview underlying the show does not offer closure. It offers continuation. Systems evolve. Models update. Understanding remains partial. The universe continues behaving according to rules that do not adapt to preference. These ideas are not presented to be resolved. They sit beneath the surface, steady and unremarkable, shaping events without explanation. Science does not announce itself. It operates quietly, persistently, shaping outcomes while everything else continues moving forward at its own pace. Another quiet scientific presence in Rick and Morty is the idea of thresholds. In many real systems, change does not happen gradually. Conditions build slowly until a boundary is crossed, and then behavior shifts suddenly. Phase transitions in physics, tipping points in ecology, neural firing in the brain. Rick's universe frequently behaves this way. Long stretches of relative stability give way to abrupt transformation once limits are exceeded. These thresholds are often invisible until they are crossed. Systems appear stable right up until they are not. Rick's confidence in control often dissolves at these moments, reflecting a real scientific limitation. Predicting exactly when a system will change states is notoriously difficult, even when the rules are known. In real science, exact solutions are rare. Most problems are solved through estimates, simulations, and simplified assumptions. Rick's inventions often operate on approximations pushed to extremes. They work well enough until small errors compound. The failures are exaggerated, but the principle remains familiar. The show also reflects the idea that knowledge is unevenly distributed. No system knows everything about itself. Parts operate with local information. Decisions are made without global awareness. This is true in biology, computer networks, and economies. Rick often acts with incomplete information, even when his intelligence suggests otherwise. Complexity hides details by default. Energy efficiency plays a subtle role. Systems that consume too much energy destabilize themselves. Real organisms evolve toward efficiency because waste threatens survival. Rick's machines frequently burn through energy aggressively, and the consequences appear as breakdowns, overheating, or collapse. Excess always leaves a mark. The relationship between simplicity and power is also present. Simple rules can produce complex behavior. Cellular automata, fractals, emergent patterns. Rick's universe is filled with systems built on minimal assumptions that spiral into complexity. Control becomes difficult not because rules are complicated, but because outcomes multiply. The show's portrayal of intelligence also reflects cognitive limits. Attention is finite. Processing capacity has bounds. Even advanced minds cannot track everything simultaneously. Rick's mistakes often occur when complexity outpaces focus. This mirrors real neuroscience. Brains evolved for survival, not omniscience. Time delays appear quietly throughout the series. Actions do not produce immediate consequences. Feedback arrives later, sometimes too late to adjust. In control theory, delayed feedback destabilizes systems. Rick's interventions often trigger delayed effects that undermine initial success. The concept of noise appears often. Random variation, measurement error, unpredictable interference. Noise is not failure. It is a fundamental feature of real systems. Rick's precision is constantly undermined by randomness, reflecting the impossibility of perfect control. Scientific tools in the show often alter the systems they measure. This mirrors real measurement problems. Probes disturb environments. Observation changes behavior. Rick's invasive techniques create unintended effects simply by existing within the system. What works at small scales fails at larger ones. Solutions do not scale cleanly. Rick's devices often function perfectly in isolation, but fail when applied broadly. Real science encounters this constantly. Laboratory success does not guarantee real-world stability. The show also acknowledges uncertainty without resolving it. Predictions are probabilistic. Outcomes branch. Certainty erodes with complexity. Rick operates within uncertainty rather than eliminating it. This reflects modern scientific realism more than classical determinism. The universe in Rick and Morty does not reward understanding with peace. Understanding reveals limits. It exposes fragility. It expands the space of possible failure. This aligns with real science, where deeper knowledge often complicates rather than simplifies. These ideas remain understated. They do not demand attention. They operate beneath the surface, shaping events quietly, interacting, compounding, drifting forward alongside everything else, without pause or conclusion, continuing in the background as the universe keeps moving. Another idea that lingers quietly beneath Rick and Morty is robustness. In science, robust systems are not perfect. They are tolerant of failure. They bend, reroute, and degrade slowly, instead of collapsing all at once. Rick's universe is filled with systems that survive damage by absorbing it unevenly. Some parts fail completely, while others continue functioning. This uneven survival mirrors real biological and technological systems, where resilience comes from redundancy rather than strength. Closely tied to this is the idea of brittleness. Highly optimized systems often fail catastrophically when pushed outside narrow conditions. Rick's most advanced inventions tend to be the most fragile. They work flawlessly until they don't. Real engineering faces the same trade-off. Optimization increases efficiency, but reduces tolerance for error. In biology, cells isolate processes to prevent cascading failure. In engineering, systems are segmented to contain damage. Rick repeatedly isolates problems into pocket dimensions, sealed environments, or self-contained loops. The logic is familiar. Contain the failure. Limit the spread. But containment is never permanent. Boundaries degrade. The show also reflects real scientific discomfort with prediction. Even with powerful models, future states remain uncertain. Weather, ecosystems, economies, and brains resist long-term forecasting. Rick's predictions fail not because he lacks intelligence, but because prediction itself breaks down in complex systems. Knowledge does not eliminate surprise. Memory behaves like a scientific variable rather than a narrative one. Memories degrade. They interfere. They overwrite. In neuroscience, memory is not stored in single locations. It is distributed. Rick's ability to manipulate memory exaggerates this distribution, but the fragility remains accurate. Alter memory and behavior shifts unpredictably. Humans adapt quickly to extraordinary conditions. In psychology, repeated exposure reduces emotional response. Rick and Morty normalize cosmic danger until it becomes background noise. This mirrors real habituation. The nervous system dampens response to persistent stimuli. The show also reflects scientific realism about intelligence and emotion. Cognitive capacity does not replace emotional regulation. In neuroscience, emotion is not a flaw, it is a processing system. Rick's difficulty managing emotion reflects the real impossibility of separating cognition from feeling entirely. Scale reappears in moral consequence as well. At small scales, actions feel significant. At large scales, they dissolve statistically. Rick's casualness emerges from scale mismatch rather than cruelty. This echoes real ethical debates in large systems where individual impact becomes diffuse. The universe continues to resist narrative closure. Problems are postponed rather than solved. Systems move on instead of resolving. This mirrors scientific practice. Research rarely ends. It evolves. Questions shift rather than disappear. Even causation itself remains probabilistic. Effects follow causes loosely, influenced by context, noise, and timing. Rick's interventions rarely produce clean outcomes. Real systems behave the same way. Science in Rick and Morty does not promise mastery. It offers tools that work temporarily. It reveals structure without guaranteeing control. It expands understanding while shrinking certainty. These ideas do not rise to the surface. They remain quiet, structural, persistent. They shape behavior without explanation. They sit beneath the humor and chaos, operating steadily, interacting subtly, continuing forward without resolution, without emphasis, without any need to announce that they are still there. In real systems, inputs eventually stop producing meaningful change. Adding more energy, more data, or more intervention reaches a point of diminishing returns. Rick's constant escalation reflects this. Bigger inventions do not produce proportionally better outcomes. Complexity increases, but benefit plateaus. This appears often in real science. In neuroscience, additional stimulation can overwhelm rather than enhance processing. In engineering, adding features increases failure points. In ecosystems, excess resources destabilize balance. Rick's solutions frequently overshoot, not because they are wrong, but because they exceed what the system can meaningfully absorb. The show also mirrors scientific ideas about path dependence. Outcomes depend not just on conditions, but on the sequence of events that led there. Two systems with identical components behave differently if their histories differ. Rick replaces environments freely, but continuity never fully resets. Past paths linger invisibly. Systems rarely exist independently. Changes in one affect others. Tight coupling increases efficiency, but also risk. Rick's technology often links systems together aggressively, and failures propagate quickly. Real-world engineering and ecology face the same problem. Highly connected systems amplify disturbance. The idea of noise shaping outcomes appears again. Random fluctuations influence which paths become dominant. Evolution, learning, and adaptation all depend on variation. Rick's universe exaggerates noise into absurdity, but the scientific principle remains. Order emerges from variation, not despite it. The show also reflects limits of reversibility in cognition. Minds cannot simply revert to prior states. Experience alters structure. Even when memories are modified, behavior does not fully reset. Real neuroscience supports this. Plasticity leaves traces. Scientific models in the show often operate under extreme assumptions. Perfect isolation, infinite resources, complete information. When these assumptions break, so do outcomes. This mirrors real modeling challenges. Simplifications work only within narrow domains. Gains in one dimension create losses in another. Speed reduces accuracy. Power reduces stability. Reach reduces control. Rick constantly navigates trade-offs rather than solutions. This reflects real engineering realism. the universe continues to resist total explanation. Knowledge expands, but so does uncertainty. Each answer opens more questions. Rick's understanding deepens without bringing closure. Real science behaves the same way. Even progress becomes ambiguous. Systems improve locally while degrading globally. Short-term success undermines long-term stability. This pattern appears across technology, ecology, and economics. Rick's actions follow similar trajectories. The scientific worldview underlying the show remains observational rather than moral. It does not judge outcomes. It describes behavior. Rick operates within that neutrality, exploiting patterns without changing them. These ideas remain embedded rather than declared. They shape events without instruction. They persist quietly, repeating across situations, interacting, drifting forward alongside everything else that continues without pause, without emphasis, without needing to be resolved or named. Another idea that continues to surface quietly is constraint satisfaction. In real science and engineering, most problems are not about finding perfect solutions, but about finding states that satisfy enough constraints to function. Rick's inventions rarely achieve ideal outcomes. They meet minimum requirements long enough to operate. Stability is temporary, but sufficient. This reflects how real systems survive. Organisms are not optimized for perfection, but for adequacy. Machines are built to tolerate error. Models are accepted when they work well, enough within limits. Rick's universe runs on this same logic. Nothing needs to be flawless. It only needs to hold together briefly. The show also mirrors scientific ideas about abstraction layers. Complex systems are managed by hiding detail behind interfaces. Biology hides chemistry. Psychology hides biology. Technology hides physics. Rick operates across layers effortlessly, but failures often occur when layers collapse into each other. When hidden complexity resurfaces, control falters. Actions take time to propagate. Signals delay. Effects arrive later than causes. Rick's ability to act instantly hides latency until consequences appear elsewhere. Delayed reactions undermine initial success, reflecting real feedback problems in control systems. The idea of equilibrium appears frequently. Systems drift toward states of minimal energy or balanced forces. Rick disrupts equilibrium constantly, but systems attempt to restore it. Collapse, adaptation, or replacement follows. Real science sees equilibrium not as stasis, but as dynamic balance. Biological realism continues beneath exaggeration. Bodies require rest. Repair takes time. Damage accumulates. Even advanced interventions do not remove these limits entirely. Rick's technology stretches biology, but never fully escapes it. The show also reflects real scientific uncertainty about consciousness. Intelligence appears in many forms. Awareness varies. Some beings process information without reflection. Others reflect without control. Rick's universe presents consciousness as spectrum rather than category, aligning with modern cognitive science. Another recurring idea is scaling error. Predictions fail when systems grow larger. Small-scale success does not extrapolate cleanly. Rick's solutions often work in isolation and fail in broader application. Real-world science encounters this constantly. The universe continues operating under consistent rules, even when outcomes appear chaotic. Randomness remains bounded. variability follows distributions. Rick exploits randomness, but never controls it fully. The show avoids presenting science as destiny. Physical laws constrain behavior, but they do not dictate specific outcomes. Multiple futures remain possible. Rick navigates probability rather than certainty, reflecting modern scientific realism. None of these ideas are emphasized overtly. They remain structural, quiet, persistent. They shape events without commentary. They repeat across contexts, not as lessons, but as background conditions. Science, in Rick and Morty, does not demand understanding. It operates regardless. It continues adjusting systems, balancing forces, redistributing energy, shaping behavior, while everything else moves forward alongside it, unhurried, unresolved, simply continuing.